Hey guys, Henning and Morten from Flip Normals here, and welcome to this, second part in the series of sculpting realistic faces. This one is for sculpting women. Thank you so much for the support and buying this tutorial. And yeah, it's gonna be a full-fledged face tutorial from sphere to finished face. You know, we're gonna cover a lot of things like basic sculpting techniques, form, gesture, hair. There's going to be some bonus stuff in there about eyelashes. So all in all, it's a really well-rounded tutorial on how to sculpt faces, but specifically more, women.
Yeah, women definitely have their own challenges compared to men, because men are more like orcs. It's a bit like you have a lot of features, a lot of plane changes. Women are more like babies in just the forms. You got to sculpt. You got to have nothing in there. You got to just have the subtleties. You're talking about hints.
Your sculpting technique can be a little more loose when it comes to men. And that's not you don't have to be, as good when you're sculpting men. You have to be just as good when you're sculpting men. It's just a different challenge. It's a different kind of level of detail. With women, it's all about subtlety and it's all about being soft. That's the key point when sculpting women. Yeah. That's what makes it so tricky, because anything you do, especially as a man, when you're sculpting, tends to make things look more masculine. That's what we know. And the majority of the audience, at least our audience, they are men. And that's the case for a lot of in this industry. So getting in both women to help you, like my girlfriend, she helped me with this sculpt because, it's always nice with reference and getting a woman's perspective on what should a woman look like. So I think that's helpful.
Yeah.
So in the beginning here, it's just like getting the main shape of the face. I try to stay away from features in the beginning, just getting the shape of the skull, just the plane of the front of the face there, the neck in as well. Early on, I'll also get the shoulders and part of the chest, just because I think it's something that I'm working towards in terms of the gesture. So it's just for me to keep it in mind. And it's a lot harder, I think, to have a sculpt and have it representative of a face, like a true face, without having the shoulders, because the shoulders say so much about the gesture. Even if it's not posed yet, even if the shoulders are just in there and they're neutral.
Yeah, I think it's important to get gesture in early as well. Just what should it feel like? Yeah. Should it feel like a soft, beautiful sculpt, or should it feel more like a brute sculpt? What you're doing now at this stage is laying down a foundation for everything to come.
And another thing to keep in mind here, you can see, just as a small detail, we have the front of the face is quite flat. I mean, there might be a little angle to it, but I usually start out with the front of the face quite flat, kind of like a bike helmet almost. Like it's just like, there's no features, there's nothing to distract me. And for women, what you want to do in the face, unless it's like that Hollywood sort of classic or like CG kind of woman, it's always nice to think about additional fat pads. Where can you add a little bit of, just a tiny amount of fat to soften up the face a little more? That's, under one thing that even women with more square jaws, that usually square jaws is always what, the Hollywood stars have. And when you think of a classical beauty or a classical beautiful woman, it's always like more, there's some masculine features in there, but softened up with a little bit of fat. And having something under the chin, just a little bit of fat under there, helps to soften up that look. You gotta check I guess it's important to check all angles when you're sculpting. One thing that I see a lot is that, especially from beginners, is they're very focused on when you're using reference, usually the reference that you find, especially of celebrities, is a front-facing picture, maybe one from the profile. So usually those are the two main angles that people will focus on. But looking at your sculpt from the back and from the top and below can help you to evaluate the form better. Especially if you're looking from the top, it's a lot easier to evaluate your skull shape. And sometimes if you don't, it's easy to make it either too long or too short.
Also, whenever you're starting, this is something we keep saying in every single video because it's so important. Use reference for every single thing. And that doesn't mean you have to do a likeness study. If you're looking at Scarlett Johansson for your sculpt here, you don't have to make it look exactly like her. You can mix it between 10 different people. The point is just that you have some truth in your sculpt, because otherwise everything is just going to, like, nothing is going to feel grounded. Proportions are probably going to be all over the place.
Yeah. I mean, for this one, in terms of reference, what did I use? That's a good question. I used a lot of, I used references of black women, Asian women, and white women. Like, it was a big mix. In the end, you know, it's definitely more of it's a Caucasian sculpt for sure.
Yeah.
But it started out more focused on maybe like someone like a black woman or something. But then I slowly moved away from that.
Yeah, you can also totally experiment.
Yeah.
Just as long as you have something there.
Yeah.
And also with reference as well, we don't just mean photos. This can also be, you know, live models. If you have a girlfriend, or if you are indeed a woman yourself, then
you know, find a friend who will, you know, help you with her face.
Have a mirror.
Get your mom, you know, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Which is really helpful.
Yeah, it doesn't mean they have to sit for model for days. You know, just take photos of them, or it's also just useful just as a sanity check.
Yeah. So here with just with a brush, I'll sometimes go in and just mark areas where I want the main features to be. Like, here's just an indication of the ears. I'm not putting these in yet, but it's just to figure out where is the sort of center line of my skull, and where's the midpoint where I want the eyes to start. So it's just a way to measure out the different points on my model.
Yeah. Yeah, these are some points which generally, they're like, kind of like universal truths.
Yeah.
There's definitely variation between people here, but there are some general things here, like the eyes mostly in the center. The ear is the line of the nose, and the brow, a couple of just general proportions.
Something that I took away from, and we talked about this if you've seen the previous series about sculpting men, is we talked a lot about Philippe Farreau, and I would still wholeheartedly recommend that you buy his series of sculpting videos. So one of the things he talks about, which I try to implement whenever I'm sculpting faces, is obviously, so he's sculpting in clay, traditional clay. So when you're taking away form, when I'm pushing into the form, like you can see with the eye socket, I try to think about where would that volume go. So I try to treat it as if I'm carving in to the eye socket, I will push that volume out and use that as volume for the cheekbones.
Yeah, it's really interesting having traditional analogies here, because it's all the same thing at the end of the day. What you're dealing with is just volume.
Yeah.
Whether you're doing that in ZBrush or Maya, Blender, traditional clay, drawing, you know, it doesn't really matter. It's all just about understanding form at the end of the day.
Yeah. And you have connected to the cheek, you have the zygomatic, is that line that goes back from the cheekbone back to the ear, and it goes back towards the ear at a slight angle. So it's like it goes upwards a little bit. Some people tend to make it too straight sometimes. It's just something you have to keep in mind.
And also just notice how much time we're spending on the foundation here. Like, at this point, a lot of beginners would have already added specific features like eyelids and the nose cavities.
Yeah.
You know, like specific features, getting into the lips. But it's nowhere near ready for that.
No, I spend so much time on the skull shape.
Yeah.
You know, the skull shape, I think, is so important because it's kind of like a line drawing. Once you have the lines down, you can go in and color it in.
Yeah.
Coloring in is a little easier because you have a reference to sort of like stick to. But the line drawing in the beginning is always the tricky part.
Yeah, if you don't do this, then it's like trying to color in without any lines. Yeah. And now you're just adding random colors everywhere. It might give you some interesting experiments, just not going to look like anything tangible.
An interesting thing that I noticed when I was sculpting this for my references, one of them had, in terms of the ear, usually you say with the ear that the ears are sort of like, the top of the ear follows the brow and the bottom of the ear is like the bottom of the nose. But the references that I used for this actually was the ear was placed way lower. Not just because of the angle of the face, but the ears were just placed a lot lower. So I tried to do that for this face, but I thought it was wrong in the beginning.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we just talked about now, that there are some universal things, and they're just there as a starting point. They're just there so that you're not placing the ear with the line of the mouth is or whatever.
Yeah.
But this is where you got to look at reference.
Individual variation.
Yeah. We've been working on a series now as well, which we're talking about specific facial features and just looking at so many different kinds of reference for doing that. And when you're like, oh, this is what an ear looks like. Yeah, but there's a reason people look different.
Yeah.
It's because every single variation you can have on a human face or human body can be altered. If you have, let's say you have 20 different variations for the nose, you have the exact same thing for the eyes and ears and everything, and change any one of them and it looks like a completely different person.
Yeah. Here in the beginning as well, you can see now that we've added the nose, it's still undefined. It's just a general nose shape. And in the beginning, I try to focus more on planes. Obviously, with the woman here, it's going to be a little softer, so it won't be like trim dynamic and go and actually define planes. Yeah. But just having a few planes, so I can just get a feel for the shape and the volume of all the features.
And notice how low poly it is as well.
Yeah, and it stays like this for a while. So
this is one of the number one issues I've seen when I've been talking to students. They keep going high poly way too early.
Yeah, I mean, I the way I see it is like I'm not above going too high poly. Like I'm weak, you know, so I don't want to give myself that power. I know that once you start going high poly, then I can add more detail. Yeah. That being said, you know, someone who's an experienced sculptor can definitely start out high poly from the beginning, because then it's a lot more comparable to just sculpting in a traditional media where you technically have infinite resolution. Yeah. It's just a helpful tool when you're doing it digitally, because it helps you, you know, you can ignore all the noise and don't get tempted to add detail yet.
And some of the brushes also work better in high poly, like the clay brushes.
Yeah.
But that's also a blessing and a curse, because they might work a bit better. I find it easier to control the shape that way. But it also gives you too much control. And now you get the brush strokes. And people love the brush strokes. And that's terrible, because they might look cool. But at this stage here, you are not doing anything to make it look cool. Like, you're not adding the gimmicky stuff on top, such as sexy brush strokes or any of that. If you get attached to brush strokes at this point, then you know you've already failed the sculpt.
I think that's a good point. Like, it's at this stage you don't want to get too attached to anything.
No.
You're working up the skull shape and maybe adding in a few layers of fat here and there or something that creates volume, but you're not attached to it at this point. Like, this could easily be transformed into a child right now. You know, just lower the eyes, collect the features a little more, and then you have a child. So it's giving yourself that freedom at this point to also experiment a little bit.
We could basically turn this into any humanoid character if you want to go.
I mean, right now you can't see that it's a woman.
No, exactly. It's like you could transform this into an orc or a cute little child or an old man or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
But that's just because the foundation is strong.
So, and for this one, this is just how I've added the mouth for many years now. I go in and add the volume, just so I have control of sort of like where's the volume of the mouth. In the beginning, I don't concern myself too much with the upper lip or lower lip. It's just to sort of get an indication of the volume there.
Yeah, one of the number one issues I see with the mouth is that people make it entirely flat.
Yeah.
Like from the front view, it's just a straight line down. But the reason the mouth has a big curve to it, what you can think about there is that you have teeth. Everyone knows the teeth curve because, you know, they follow the skull.
Yeah.
And you can consider the lips as just wrapping around the teeth. Yeah, if you want something more feminine as well, you can make the neck long and thin. Mm. And if you want the opposite, you can make it short and stocky.
Yeah, it's crazy how much masculinity you can get in your sculpt just by working up the neck a little bit. You know, you make the neck a little thicker, define the sternocleidomastoid a little more, just have a hint of an Adam's apple. You can see I currently have that, so that's something that needs to go away. But those things already make it more masculine.
Yeah.
And smoothing those areas out is like it's a magic pill, making it more feminine. This is where the most basic of form is down, and then I'm starting to think about the kind of gesture that I want from this. Like, I won't be posing it yet until later in the series, because I want to be able to work symmetrically. And unless you're doing it for a challenge or asymmetrically, then I don't think there's a reason to do that from the beginning. No. Especially not for a tutorial like this. That would just make a 8-hour long tutorial, if not more.
And it probably wouldn't even look as good.
No, probably not.
From a technical point of view here, this is very simple. You use clay brushes and Dynamesh.
Yep.
Starting with the sphere and just dragging it out.
One thing I will point out, though, with when I'm sculpting women, is that I use the smooth brush basically as an additional brush. So usually the way I work when I work with men is that I will work up the volume, and I will try to stay away from the smooth brush to not define too many things. But with women, it's 50-50. I go clay buildup, smooth, clay buildup, smooth, because it allows me to blend the forms so nicely and so like in a subtle way, much more subtle than with men. So I think it's a very powerful tool if you know how to use it.
Yeah, one of the issues we've been talking about before in some of our free videos about the smooth brush is that it kills the form, which is exactly what you want.
Yeah.
If you're doing something like this, you it's one of these, you don't want the forms to be blurry, but you want them to be soft but not undefined. There's like a really fine balance here where it's just like blurry and undefined. That's just ambiguous. Right now it is, like the face is just undefined, but you just want the features to be really soft. And finding that balance, it might take you years to understand. It took me years personally.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's not just standard smooth. I do smoothing and alternate smoothing as well. How you do?
That is when you hold down the shift key, you smooth, and then you release the shift key.
That's the one, yeah.
And that's better for certain things.
Yeah. Then you, when you're just using the regular smooth, especially when you're using Dynamesh, there's a tendency to get pinching.
Yeah.
Because the topology is strange. So with the alternate smooth, it's a more relaxed smooth. So it tends to make the surface a lot smoother, I guess.
Yeah, and also you're not just going over the entire form.
No.
You're let's say you have a brush stroke from the clay brushes, then you'll just smooth maybe one side of the brush stroke, so you still have a sharp side of it. Exactly. It's just that the other one blends into it, so you still get sharp lines for it.
Yeah, I think learning to use the smooth brush in an effective way, it's definitely an art, and it takes a while. That's
also why I recommend beginners to just stay the hell away from it, because it's such an easy crutch to get used to. So it takes a long time to master that one.
So now we are finally getting into a little more resolution, because at this point, the forms that I want are there. I'm not bothering with the ear at this point in time, because I've sort of gauged where I want the ear to sit. So for now, I'm just working up some of the features a little bit. The ear, should really be like a chapter on its own, because it's so complicated.
Well, we get that in a separate tutorial.
That's true. Yeah, the ear is tricky, and there's so much individual variation with ears. Yeah. I heard someone talk about ears like fingerprints. I don't know if that's true or not, but they are really varied.
I guess everything is kind of like fingerprints. If you were to really look at it, like noses and eyes and everything, they're all individual.
Yeah.
It's just that there isn't really a pattern per se, but everything is just so individual.
Yeah. And then now after, we've carved in the eye socket, start to add some of the fat that sits on top of the brow, just to soften out the form a little more. I'm prepping the area for the eyeballs. And when I'm sculpting something just from a sphere like this, usually I'll sculpt the eyes as part of the skull. Now, a little disclaimer, it's a terrible idea, just because it's way harder. It's something, I do it, one, so you can follow along in the undo history, but also it's like when I move things or something, it just, everything stays connected. But doing a separated eyeball, like separate piece of geometry, just, I would recommend that you do that. If you want to do it like me and be stupid, then you could do it like me. But it's trickier.
It's one of these personal habits.
Yeah.
But it's also interesting with the eye as well, because it's one of these, you just got to work it up. You can't just start adding the eyelids.
No.
Not even at this point can you really start adding the eyelid, because you still got to work it up. And this is the tricky part as well. How do you learn to work it up? Because when I was a beginner, I would always just start right with the eyelids and all the specific features, because I didn't really know. Yeah, people say work it up, but what the hell does that even mean?
Yeah, and eyes is something that's the first thing you notice.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So.
But what we specifically mean work it up here is, this is the fundamentals. You got to go back to the fundamentals, and the fundamentals here is the skull. When we say work it up, basically everything in this video so far has been working on the skull. Yeah, we added a bit of a nose here and all, but that's basically just cartilage.
Yeah.
And then there's been some fatty stuff, but basically this entire video so far has been about the skull. So if you do understand the skull, then you can sculpt anything.
Yeah.
If you don't understand the skull, then you are going to be severely limited, and you can only take it up to like maybe 60%, and you can never ever go above that. Unless you're cheating and using scans and stuff like that. But then you wouldn't be watching our tutorial.
Yeah, I mean, what you can also do is you can import a 3D model of a skull and have it underneath your sculpt. Yeah. That really helps.
For sure.
And, scans is a excellent reference if you can find some, or maybe you buy some, because they help you to see the true form without getting distracted by light from pictures and stuff like that.
Mad shout out to 3dscanstore.com. They have amazing stuff. I would recommend stuff like 3D Scan Store over like museum sculpts, because there are tons of sculpts of scans of awesome statues at the museum. But the problem with those is they might be like 600 years old, and they've been interpreted so heavily and cast in stone and all that.
Yeah.
And they might be amazing statues, but if you were to objectively look at them in ZBrush or something, they can't compare to a real scan of a real human, because there is no interpretation in those.
At this point, I slightly indicated the mouth. This is not, shall we say, the mouth. It's just more to know for myself how do I want the distance. How long do I want the philtrum? How long do I want the distance from the lower lip to the chin to be? So it's more just like a little sketch, just sketch in where just so I can figure out my proportions.
I always have a hard time mentally with this stage when you go from, because it goes from a fairly appealing base where there is nothing really there, but it's still appealing and has some real beauty to it, to now where you're just roughly adding in a nose and a mouth and all that, and it suddenly doesn't look very good anymore. Yeah,
this is where all your self-doubt starts to come in, and you go like, I thought I conquered this in my last sculpt, which looked good, but now it looks not good again.
You forgot that this stage existed. This is what some people, I think Ryan Kingsland, call it, like the valley of the suck, where it's just like you're gonna get through it, but it's just gonna suck for some time.
Yeah.
But also, whenever I'm at this stage, I had this the other day when I was sculpting for the specific face tutorial, and I was looking at an ear or something I was sculpting, and I was like, man, this looks like crap. And I was looking at the recording, and I was like, I've been sculpting for 4 minutes.
Yeah.
It's like, dude, chill out.
Yeah.
You haven't forgotten everything you knew about sculpting. You've been sculpting for 4 minutes.
Yeah, that's and as you get better and better and more experienced, those things, you're just going to get faster to get to this point. At this point, we've been sculpting for almost half an hour. 90% of this has been purely on the shape of the skull. Yeah. It's just just in the last few minutes where we actually stepped up the detail level and reached a detail level where we can add some definition to some of the features.
And one of the differences between somebody who's a beginner and somebody who's more experienced is, can you get through that sucky area? Like, can you conquer it? If you're a beginner, you might just give up. You feel so demotivated. Well, when I'm doing it, I feel just as demotivated. It's just that I just don't care. You
embrace the pain.
You just embrace the pain and you just power through it.
Yeah.
And that's every single project has that. And it has that for multiple stages. I'm currently working on a personal project now where the head sculpt is mostly done, but now I'm into texturing. And it's like first pass texturing. And again, the whole thing goes again where it's like, I've been working as a professional texture artist with film for 4 years. And I'm like, man, have I ever forgotten everything I knew about texturing?
Yeah.
No, I spent 2 hours on the textures. Of course they aren't there. You just gotta accept it that your model is gonna suck for a bit.
This is how I add the eyes. Again, it's just a volume in the beginning. So nothing more than that. I'm just trying to figure out where to place them, because now I have the eye socket, and this just allows me to sort of like, I kind of treat it as a model with closed eyes at this point. So, I haven't defined the lid, not really. I haven't defined the separation between the two lids, but it's sort of like to give me an overall idea of how deep is the eye socket really once you start adding the volume of the eyes.
Yeah, you really got to consider the eyes as spheres, because if you just kind of start making them flat, which is maybe the same as with the mouth, number one beginner mistake for the eyes as well. You just look at the front view and you don't have depth in the front view. But the same thing with the eyes as with the mouth, it wraps around a circle. Teeth are being wrapped by the lips, and the eyelids are wrapping around an eyeball. And it's one of these where, yeah, of course, Henning, why do you keep telling us this? This is so obvious. Yeah, it is obvious once you know it.
Yeah. And here's a view from below, which I think is important to do once in a while. It allows you to check out the shape of your nose, but more importantly, check out the curvature of the mouth. It just keeps you in check and ensures that your mouth doesn't, stay flat to the face. Because the mouth, like Henning said, actually has some curvature to it just because it wraps around the teeth. This is something you start to see in older people that lose their teeth. It kind of tends to flatten out a little bit, and the jaw sort of like starts to go up. So it changes a lot once, with age.
And this is one of these things that if you know the skull, none of this really matters. Like, you're not going to make the beginner's mistakes of making the mouth flat, because you can't. Because if you have a skull in there and now you're just wrapping some skin around it, you aren't going to make it flat because you're just wrapping around something circular.
Yeah.
So you kind of get that for free. Same if you're doing the eyes as well and you put in some eyeballs, or whatever the eyeballs are there, you're not going to make them flat because they're wrapping around something circular or something spherical. If you look at mummies, if you look at their eyes, it's really cool because they are completely flat, because they've been drying up for like 3,000 years, and there is no eyeball there to support their shape. So we did this when I worked on the mummy. We worked on some mummies for that and just looked at some really old and gnarly stuff, and the eyes are just completely shriveled up and flat.
So here, there's going to be some indication of lids now. So it's just just working in some rough shape of where do I want the eyes to sit now, like specifically with the eyeball. So I use what was the eyeball before to define the lids, and like with everything else, this is gonna look low res, and it's gonna take a while to improve that look, just because we don't have a lot of detail, but it's not something that's important to focus on right now.
And you can see, because when you sculpted this, you added the eyeballs, the spherical parts there. Right now, you kind of got the curvature for free. Sure, you gotta adjust it a little bit.
Yeah.
But it's not flat, just because there was some surface there already. One thing I'll also recommend you guys to do is we have 2 videos on our YouTube channel, they're related to observation. One is called The Real Reason We Use Reference, and the other one is called something like The Most Useful Skill Nobody Taught You, Observation. Yeah. Really recommend you to check those out, because we specifically talk about how do you observe reference? What's the real reason for doing that? It's one of these core skills which, regardless of what it is you're doing, you just need it.
It's interesting at this point, if you're comparing this sculpt to someone who's just starting out, there might not be that big of a difference. There might be a difference in the way the skull is shaped, but in terms of the features, they're still fairly undefined at low res. But from this point on, that's where more experience and just doing it again and again will allow you to get past this stage and start to, refine the shapes to a point where they actually look like how they're supposed to look.
So really, if there's anything you want to take away from this tutorial, or from this first chapter here, it's just start low res. The resolution here is crazy low still. Use simple tools, build it up slowly and methodically. Don't rush into things. Get the skull in there. Get the skull in, and everything else will follow.
That there was just to emphasize that the inside of the eye usually needs to be pushed in a lot further than people realize.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
Again, to get that curve. So, here's another tip for differences between men and women. So, if you pull in your eye socket or eyeball in a lot deeper, that tends to give it a more manly look, because then you have a thicker brow. So, you can push out the eye just a little more to flatten the face just a tiny bit, and that gives it a softer, more feminine look. And that's the same with the brow. You'll never see in this whole series working on the brow particularly long. There's no adding crazy shape or crazy volume to it. It needs to be soft, defined, but soft.
Yeah, guys have a crazy defined glabella, at least some people. Yeah. That's just like the brow, basically. And women, you just soften that stuff up. There might be a hint of it, but in general, it's kind of like the Neanderthal brow.
Yeah, the Neanderthal brow is very, only some men have it, but it tends to be one of those very masculine features that you see in like superheroes and those kinds of people.